I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
If we're grown-ups, we need to be able to talk about these things. We have to care about what is actually true. We owe it to ourselves to care about our own contradictions, and we owe it to others, those with whom we're arguing, to continue to point out their internal contradictions. I mean, this is actually the most compelling sort of criticism of another person's view. It's one thing to say, I mean, if we're arguing about, religion or climate change or whatever it is, if I'm pointing to facts over there that you don't acknowledge, right, it's a very weak argument. I can't make a lot of headway with you. But if I can show you the way in which your own assumptions are in conflict with themselves, right, that you actually can't functionally believe what you say you believe, everything at the same time, right? I mean, you could believe one thing on Monday and another thing on Tuesday, but if you try to get the Monday truths and the Tuesday truths to cohere, you're actually in contradiction with yourself. That's a much more powerful rebuttal to you. And we have to...
But that's where people have the bias, though. They just won't admit it. So there's ways, I think, when you kind of isolate these cognitive biases and how it affects you, there's ways to overcome them a little bit.
Right.
So what I'm curious is, do you think, A, it's clear we have all these cognitive biases. B, most people will probably deny it in most cases. But C, do you think there's ways to overcome a lot of these biases? How can they be healthy for us going forward? How can we use knowledge of these biases going forward to improve our lives? So I am so happy to be here with Sam Harris. I've been a fan for a long time. He was on the podcast 5 years ago after his book Waking Up came out, but he's written books like The End of Faith, The Moral Landscape, Lying, Free Will, Waking Up. We're going to talk probably a little bit about all of them, and most recently his app, Waking Up. We'll be talking about that. And his podcast, which used to be called Waking Up, what's the name of it now?
Making Sense.
Making Sense. Why'd you change the name?
There was some brand confusion there around. So I wrote this book, Waking Up, and then I honestly cannot remember why I titled my podcast Waking Up. But I was just a man who ran out of titles apparently, so I just poached it from the book. But the book was fairly narrowly focused on meditation and the nature of consciousness and how we can understand spiritual experience in a scientific context, which is maybe 5% of the subject matter that I deal with in my podcast. So it was always the wrong name for the podcast. it turns out it is the right name for the meditation app that I wanted to release, but I couldn't have them titled the same way. It was just too confusing. So I rebranded the podcast as Making Sense, which actually makes more sense for what the topics I touch.
And there's so many different things that I want to talk about with you. Ranging from the topics in your books to all sorts of ways the world could end, which I feel like is not necessarily a theme of yours, but comes up quite a bit from your TED Talks to your. What did you do last night?
So last night I did a live podcast, a live event with Danny Kahneman at the Beacon, which was fun. I had never done an event with Danny before, and as many viewers, listeners may know, he wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. He's one of the fathers of behavioral economics, prospect theory. Before that, he's arguably the most influential psychologist alive at the moment.
And he basically kind of named and did the research, finding all these, what we call cognitive biases, all these things that influence our behaviors without us realizing it.
Yeah, along with his colleague Amos Tversky, who died. Maybe actually I forgot when he died, but at least around 10 years ago or so. And so the two of them, I mean, Tversky certainly deserved the Nobel, had he lived. The Nobel's not given to posthumously. So, but Danny won the Nobel for in economics for the work he and Amos did.
So one thing that always comes. So you were talking to Daniel Kahneman last night. One of the things that I always think about with his working with cognitive biases is that, and I'm sure you probably touched upon this in your talk with him, is that for better or for worse, we think we have free will. We think we make our decisions. We think that these decisions are informed by rational behavior. Because we all think we're smart enough to make our own decisions. And yet, what they show with these cognitive biases is that there are so many other factors that are kind of primal that influence our decisions and the behaviors we make. Like, what percentage of our behavior would you say is based on actual rational thinking as opposed to kind of external influences and cognitive biases and so on? Did this come up in the conversation?
Yeah, well, we not framed in that way. And I don't know if anyone could give you a clear answer to that question. I mean, certainly most of what we do and think and feel is not the result of what you would call a rational top-down executive appraisal of what's going on. I mean, all this stuff is being pushed into consciousness from below, and much of our reasoning is a kind of post hoc rebranding of the origins of all of this. So you have a reaction to somebody, right, that is based on something that you didn't author and really can't control, right? You have a good feeling or a bad feeling about them, and then if someone asks you, well, how did you feel about that person? You very quickly generate a story which advertises itself as the reasons why you feel this way, and it sounds good, and so you reason in a kind of post hoc way, and give yourself an explanatory story for why you feel the way you feel. And we know from a vast number of psychological experiments that the story you tell yourself is very often bears no relationship to the reason why you came to feel the way you felt, and even if it is accurate, the conscious story level is not actually the reason, right? I mean, you can retrospectively give some plausible account of how you came to judge something a certain way, but the story is again largely just the way you're doing some internal record keeping. I mean, this is this narrative of your life that you're telling yourself, and it is the thing you can then export to the minds of others, right? You can give people reasons, and we trade in these reasons all the time. And when they're plausible, these conversations work well. When they're not, you begin to feel that you're in the presence of someone who's either not being honest or is self-deceived, or their utterances aren't tracking what can seem plausible. But much of our reasoning with one another is a kind of advocacy, both internally and externally, to justify where we arrived by some other process.
I mean, it seems like a great. I don't really like it when all of these theories come out of just scientific research, because then it feels a little too abstract. Like,
Right.
yes, I'm sure there's scientific studies that show people do this because of this or whatever. But one thing I see a lot in entrepreneurship is usually the entrepreneur who starts a company believes a lot more in his company or her company than everybody else. So
Right.
this is like a investment bias or sunken cost bias. They've invested time and energy, so they're not willing to admit that maybe their idea, their entrepreneurial idea, is not the next Google or Tesla or whatever.
Right.
And it's almost like everybody's afraid to tell them, your idea is not so good, but they're convinced this is the best idea on the planet ever. And so you see biases like that all the time, where people are justifying, behavior just because they've put time into it, so it
Yeah.
must be good.
Yeah.
Or like college is a great example. If somebody spends 4 years in college and you tell them, college wasn't really such a great thing, they're going to be like, no, it's the best thing you could possibly do with your life, because it's such a huge investment in time and money. And so you see examples like that all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And it's hard to get to some metric there where you can know whether you're right or wrong conclusively. But and there's also a self-fulfilling aspect to this. So confidence works up to a point, right? I mean, it can actually increase the odds that you'll succeed, even if it's in part, drawing some of its energy from self-deception or delusion. So it's not that, I mean, that you can easily tell a story of why an optimism bias or a kind of a my side bias is a good strategy. More often than not, and that when we would have been selected to have it, and it's I think this research has stood the test of time. When you ask people to give a self appraisal of how they're affecting other people, so you bring someone into a room of 20 strangers, and you have them give a 5-minute presentation, or you just have her introduce themselves around, and then you ask them, what sort of impression did you make on all these people? Depressed people are the most accurate, right? A normal, psychologically healthy and happy person is reliably self-deceived with respect to, in the positive direction. They think they made a better impression than they did. Now you can see this either way. Either that's adaptive. Either it's our self-esteem and our good mood and our well-being is to some degree propped up by self-deception that is necessary, or there's other ways to interpret it. I mean, depressed people could be it could be self-fulfilling. I mean, it's like they're actually, they know that their depression is sort of guaranteeing an effect on others that is easier for them to gauge.
Well, it's probably both. Like, I mean, we're doing this podcast, for instance, in a comedy club. So comedians, they often, the way they learn is by going on stage and then looking at the video of themselves on stage,
Yep.
so they could see objectively, because of this very effect. They think they did well, but then when they
Right.
look at the video afterwards, they're like, "Ugh, that was horrible." And then they can actually see objectively how they did, or at least a little bit more objectively.
They can have another perspective, however, still subjective on their performance. I mean, it's like the one thing. It's interesting how we've all changed on this front, because I remember the day where just hearing your voice on an answering machine gave this kind of uncanny feeling of, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like my voice, right? And now we're so used to seeing ourselves and hearing ourselves that I don't think anyone ever has that experience ever. I mean, or they're 4 years old when they first have it. But yeah, it gives you a sense of how others see you or may see you from the outside. I mean, it's not truly objective, but it's something you can't see from just being in your own head.
But then that's also why a lot of people in many fields, and this is part of kind of Anders Ericsson's deliberate practice, where you do 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to achieve kind of your potential in any field. It's not only you take the video, but you have a mentor or teacher who then also objectively analyzes it for you, because you are biased to think you did better than you did. So there's ways, I think, when you kind of isolate these cognitive biases and how it affects you, there's ways to overcome them a little bit So why it takes 10,000 hours instead of 1 hour.
Right.
So, what I'm curious is do you think, A, it's clear we have all these cognitive biases. B, most people will probably deny it in most cases. But C, do you think there's ways to overcome a lot of these biases, and how can they be healthy for us going forward? How can we use knowledge of these biases going forward to improve our lives?
Well, it was interesting to talk to Danny last night because, as you say, Danny is the father of much of this literature, and he's very pessimistic with respect to how much you can improve just your rationality or your navigation of what is at bottom a kind of structure to your ignorance and your unconscious mind. And what's happening, what bias is it's something more than error. It's a reliable form of error. The errors are moving in one direction, and so this part of your mentality and culture, I mean, our collective mentality that we can't see, that we can't always inspect, the code we can't easily rewrite, has a structure which is producing reliable errors, right? So this is, normal error is the sort of thing that can wash out collectively. So, the expectation that a market can't be wrong or that a whole society can't be wrong is only valid when everyone's errors are uncorrelated, right? But here we're talking about correlated error. We're talking about biases that we all share where we're going to be reliably wrong in one direction or another. And I think there are many of these. I think Danny would admit that you can become better at anticipating those situations where you're liable to be misled, where your intuitions are liable to be wrong. And from my experience in meditation, I would say that another piece here is you can be more and more aware of your emotional life and the way and your attachment to certain things being true. I mean, so a very reliable source of bias is just you're wanting things to be a certain way. I mean, just wishful thinking is this sort of overarching property of a mind that's actually, in those moments, not making valid contact with reality because you're continually gaming or attempting to game realities to deliver the message that you are going to find consoling. I don't want to see the evidence of this thing that will disappoint me.
Right,
So-
and it's so important to address that because wishful thinking is often accompanied by disappointment when you don't get what you want. If you write a book and it doesn't make it, and your happiness is linked to it getting to the bestseller list and it doesn't
Right.
get there, you're disappointed. And so, kind of being aware of that bias could improve your life.
Yeah, well, and so I mean, there's disappointment, but there's also, it's just the more you can be aware of your changes of state moment to moment, these micro disappointments or the hope and fear that is constantly percolating beneath the surface, which if you're not really vigilant, you won't know you're feeling hope and fear in each moment, right? It's like if you're not, many of us, or most of us certainly, live with an ambient level of anxiety, and
We're very high level of anxiety.
yeah, but there are people who know they have a problem with anxiety. There are people who could honestly say, no, I'm not an anxious person, I'm fine, but you can become a connoisseur of your own neurosis and your own seeking happiness, and meditation really is the tool whereby you would do that. You just become more observant of why it is you do things. Why did I say that thing? Which, I mean, there's some kind of stark examples of this. Like, we all know that name dropping and telling stories in ways that seem to the whole purpose, the very structure and intent of the whole utterance is to shine a favorable light on oneself, right? We know how that plays when other people do it, right? Like when you see somebody who's name dropping a lot and they're telling self-aggrandizing stories, it almost never gives a positive sense of who that person is, right? Like you're just it looks bad to you whenever anyone else does it, and yet almost everyone is tempted to do it themselves. Like we can't do that. The most basic piece of arithmetic where we see this thing advertised on everyone else, and it looks like if you were wearing a sweater that I thought looked terrible on you, and then your friend puts it on and it looks terrible on him too, and then I go into a store and buy that same sweater, right? It's like it's completely delusional, and yet there are many cognitive failures like this where we just don't do the math, right? And the more you can become aware of your actual intentions, like the thing I'm about to do or that I just did 5 seconds ago, while I'm selling it both to myself and to somebody else as an expression of my concern, or my altruism or my, my intellectual honesty or whatever, it was actually motivated by my fear of how I was being perceived or my, my selfishness. I wanted something that it wasn't acknowledging. It was subtext. It wasn't text in the conversation. I mean, these are humbling insights that you can have more of, and the goal there is not to just become more depressed and cynical about, what a mediocre person you are, is to actually then be able to navigate a little better through this space so that you become more of the person you want to be. I mean, what I would hope to be as a person is to shrink the distance between what is in fact true of me and what I hope people think is true of me. That's, and when that distance is wide, then you're a hypocrite. I mean, then you're living a life of stark hypocrisy. And and if you can narrow it enough, that's the effort of an examined life that is increasing honesty and self-awareness and really an ethical code.
Right. So you bring up a great example in I think it was the third hour of your recent podcast with Joe Rogan,
Mm-hmm.
where you talk about anger, and all the time I can say about me, I think about, oh, this person did me wrong, this person did me wrong, and you can't help but have these things whirring around in your
Right.
head, and a lot of it might be due to some biases. Who knows? But your point is about meditation is that kind of identifying, almost putting arm's length distance. Like, okay, I'm angry. This is why I might be angry. It might not be what I originally thought. It might be that there's other things going on in my past or my relationship with this person that could be making me angry. Like really kind of analyzing it from this meditative point of view might help you, at least in that situation, overcome whatever cognitive biases made you angry in the first place. And I'm wondering why Kahneman doesn't quite see that there is some hope. From your perspective, does Kahneman see that there's some hope in practicing overcoming these biases?
Not much hope. Yeah, I mean, I put that question to him fairly directly, and yeah, because this is his life's work. He spent a lot of time thinking about just
So he's got sunken cost bias.
Yeah, he doesn't think he has improved his intuitions really at all. I think he would admit that he's more vigilant for those situations where he's likely to make errors, but he makes the same errors, and he doesn't trust his. He has it seems that he has an additional piece of code that has come online, which is I should be aware that there's a high likelihood of error, in every circumstance, but in these particular circumstances, most of all, right? So, and most of us don't have that chip installed, right? Most of us are just using our states of confidence and doubt as the signature of valid cognition, right? So my feeling of certainty is the thing that is reporting back to me validly the closeness of fit between my beliefs and the world, right? So I've got a map, and the world is out there, and my feeling good while looking at the map is reporting to me that the map is in fact accurate, right? That's the way most of us are trying to navigate. And the problem is those feelings, the feelings of confidence, the feelings that you're right, the sense you get that, the thing you just said has the ring of truth, we know that can break apart from valid cognition totally. I mean, you can be
All the time.
completely delusional, and you feel just as sure about the validity of your beliefs.
Well, look at, I mean, the giant social experiment of social media. You have half the world believing strongly in one thing, and the other half of the world believing so strongly in the opposite that they hate their
Yeah.
neighbors who are on the other side. And everybody feels so strongly about these things. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the algorithms behind the news feed we all look down on Facebook or Twitter or whatever is motivated by these cognitive biases. So we'll be more likely to follow someone who has a lot of followers. And that person might be in a group that you then want to belong to. And then you start liking all the posts of the people in that group, whether they're real or not. So those, there's a lot of suggestions that this social media is influenced by people or bad actors or countries that want to influence opinion, and it's all related to these cognitive biases and how they interact with social media.
Yeah, and I think we have a responsibility to be vigilant in ourselves and among our friends for all of the moves we make that are enshrining this toxicity in our lives, because it's completely destroying our ability to make sense to one another journalistically and to cohere politically. And so, I mean, one thing that just came to mind as you were describing that is I noticed that people hold their enemies to a different standard than they hold their friends to. Right? It's like you notice errors of reasoning in places where you are pretty sure you disagree with the conclusions. I mean, if you don't like the way that the math is adding up on the other side of the aisle politically, you are very scrupulous in pointing out anything illogical or errors of fact. But on your side, people tend to just they know how they want the math to come out, right? They know what the conclusion should be, and then they're willing to forgive just glaring errors and omissions on en route to getting to the punchline.
What's a specific example? Because there's millions of specific examples, and I think people can relate to this strongly. But
yeah, well, I mean, so take. It's just a very simple one is evidence of racism, right? What constitutes evidence of racism? And so somebody says something or does something, and the disposition to score that as proof positive that that person is racist arises in certain contexts and it doesn't in others. And what we owe to ourselves and to everyone else is to figure out how to do this well, right? Because we acknowledge that racism is a problem and we want less of it. But however we do it, we should hold the same standard of evidence stable everywhere. And so you take the case of someone like Trump. Now, from what I know about Trump, I have no doubt that he's racist, right? I have enough both public information and private information to feel that I'm not unfairly slandering the guy to them. I think, if racism means anything, this guy is racist. Now, whether he's, KKK level racist or just, Archie Bunker level racist, we can debate. But the guy's a colossal asshole, and this is one of the reasons why he's an asshole. Now, the problem with the left, the problem with the organized opposition to Trump is that people on the left who are rightly worried about racism are so unprincipled in their allegations of racism that half of the things that they find as evidence of Trump's racism are not evidence of racism. I mean, they will call him a racist 100 times where it might only be warranted 15 times, right? And it's not only, so you have to be fair to your enemies, because pretty soon that same standard of evidence, the same spurious allegations are going to be made of your friends.
These days, we're all investors. trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. Do you think this spread between reality and truth has gotten wider as a result of A, social media, and B, maybe the polarization of the country, which we could get into in a little bit as well? Like what do you think are the seeds that are spreading this? Because it's clearly wider than it seems like it's ever been before. I don't know, but it's at least in the last 20 years.
It seems wider. I don't know what the ground truth is there. I mean, but I share that perception. It seems wider, and I think
you can't say any. If you said something in 1985, your career is over now.
Yeah. Well, I think social media is a big piece of it. I mean, there's the fact that nothing's disappearing, right? So there's this kind of, we're all trailing this mountain of digital debris that people can just sort through and in many cases maliciously, re-edit and. That we're moving into a time where, I mean, maybe technology will solve this problem for us, because we will move into a period where, you'll be able to fake anything in a way that's undetectable, right? I'll be able to create a video of you saying anything, and it'll be indistinguishable from a video of you saying what you in fact said, and then we'll begin to distrust all of these digital confections, and we'll be left with just. When it matters, you'll just have to ask the person, what is it that you actually believe, right? We've got, 400 videos of you saying these incompatible things. Who's the real authority on who you are? It might ultimately be you, right? We could be sort of returned to the gold standard of, we just have to ping the person again. But in the current environment, people are being held accountable to the least charitable possible interpretation of something they may have said, half said. It's something that can be seen or misinterpreted out of context, and everyone is being told they just need to live or die by that standard, and no clarification or apology in the case of a genuine misstep is acceptable, right? So it's like you take. And the Liam Neeson case is a recent one. So Liam Neeson, I need to defensively caveat this because I haven't followed every article that has come out about this. So I don't know if he's if we have an image of him that is makes what I'm about to describe look worse than it in fact is. But the story as I have it is Liam Neeson in the process of doing press for a movie that had vengeance as a theme, told a story about his past where he had a friend who got raped by a black man, and he, for a week afterwards, was in this state of kind of murderous, vendetta rage, where he was walking around hoping for a black man to challenge him so that he could murder a black man and any black man would do, right? So this was a kind of classic blood feud state of mind where this kind of instrumental violence, right? A person of the same type, a person from the same tribe, will be a sufficient, target of aggression. I mean, this is how vengeance is appropriately aimed. And he told this story as an all too honest confession of, can you believe how crazy I was during this week of my life? I mean, thank God nothing bad happened, right? Now that could have been, it could have been exactly how it seemed to strike me when I first heard about this, as just an amazingly honest confession about just how deranged a human mind could be, even a human mind as respectable and with as much to lose as Liam Neeson's, right? It's like Liam Neeson is a incredibly talented actor who's had a great career, who many, many people love, and he is willing to talk about how deranged he was for this week of his life. And this opens up a very interesting conversation on a massive ethical and political problem. One is just the issue of tribal violence and instrumental violence that we have to outgrow. It's anchored to notions of honor culture of the sort that Liam grew up in. He grew up through the period in Ireland where Protestants and Catholics were murdering each other, and very much within this spirit. So they killed my brothers. So I don't have to kill the person who killed my brothers. I'm just going to kill their brothers, right? It's like it is a kind of violence that is by truly modern ethical standards is psychopathic, and yet it's all too tempting given that we're just social primates, and this is the history we come from. So he opened a conversation on this topic, and because there is some construal of what he said that can seem like just stark racism, whereas I would argue, again, I don't know what else has come out in the news since I last looked at this, but assuming I'm dealing with the story as it exists, there was no evidence of racism in what he said, right? The fact that we're talking about a black man in this case is completely epiphenomenal. He could have said, listen, my friend was raped by a cop, and so I spent the next week of my life waiting, just looking for a cop to look at me cross-eyed so that I could kill a cop and get vengeance, right? That is a logically identical story, right? And if that had been the story, no one would be talking about Liam Neeson's racism. And we would have, and that would be the pure case of being able to talk about this sort of derangement, right? Or it could have been, there was the person was Norwegian, right? And he would be looking for a Norwegian. Whatever it is,
all the Norwegians in Ireland.
Everything would shift. But because we are so trigger happy on this variable of race, especially black-white, difference, people want to erase this man's career for having uttered these sentences. So that's the space we're in, and we have to find some.
And that's your point, that we're judging his statement by the worst possible denominator.
The worst possible. I mean, and it's a fairly tortured interpretation given what he said. But I guess the worst possible mind reading exercise one could conduct there is Liam Neeson just told us that he has a murderous hatred of black men. Right. That's who he is. Right. It's just not even a remotely fair interpretation. But that's where. I mean, what's so cynical about this is that the people who are calling for his head, and again, this is not just one story. There's many, many stories like this in recent months. The people who are calling for the reputational destruction and erasure of people like this don't even care if they have their facts straight. It's like they don't even, in many cases, they don't. I mean, this meme that you have to break a lot of eggs to make an omelet, right? They don't even if when you can point to the case where it's a totally innocent person going down, right? Where the story was just wrong. People are so cavalier about that now. Just the larger social project is so important that there will be a few innocent people who just get ground up under our wheels.
So what do you think? What do you think is happening? Like, what do you think triggered that? Because there's, definitely, rather than signing up to be observers of facts and multiple interpretations, we're signing up to some kind of identity. This is who I am. This is who I hate. And anyone who some intersection of what they say overlaps something I hate, I'm going to hate them. So we've kind of changed the way, or we've made more extreme the way we judge people, events, and so on. And it seems to be getting more and more extreme where, you and I talking like this, one interpretation could be, oh, sure, two white guys talking about racism. They shouldn't be doing that, which is kind of the whole definition of intersectionality, where only the most deprived voices should speak.
Right.
So that's something that's only just appeared recently. Like, what's triggering this, do you think?
Well, it's a few ideas like that one that somehow your identity is relevant when talking about basic facts, right? So, I mean, your identity can be it's obvious your identity is relevant when you're talking about your personal life experience. If you're 7 feet tall and you've had this experience of, every time you get in a car or walk into a room, you're hitting your head on something because the ceilings are too low or just nothing is ergonomic for you, right? Okay, it totally makes sense that you have a privileged position based on your height to tell the world things that I can't tell the world because I haven't had that experience, right? But there's a place to stand outside of our personal experience where we can make fair and dispassionate claims about how the world should be, what would be reasonable, what would be desirable, what would be ethical, and you and I can talk about racial justice and what would be fair and what political ends to what we would want society aimed, and it's completely irrelevant that we are both white, right? It's just you don't actually need to get a black person or two black women you don't need to balance this conversation to talk about, well, wouldn't it be great to have a society where skin color was irrelevant for any conceivable political process, right? We can acknowledge that if someone runs a study of resumes where you send out resumes to Fortune 500 companies, and the resumes are identical except for the fact that you change the names according to two variables. One seemed to be Christian white names, and the other seems to be either black names or Jewish names or Asian names, or you could run men versus women, and then we look at the results of these callback interviews or hiring practices, and we see white guys beat everyone all the time, right? Whether you're white or black or male or female, good people can acknowledge the non-normativity of that, right? Like, this is something. Okay, if this is in fact true, let's shine a light on it and figure out how to correct for it. There's no problem in doing that. And conversely, when we don't find that sort of thing happening, right, let's be honest about that, right? But what you have in this sort of victim culture of intersectionality, you have a few assumptions that are guaranteed to be wrong, right? Doing all the heavy lifting. So one assumption is any place you look in culture, wherever you see the representation of the people involved deviate from the population at large, right? So you look at the set of all computer software engineers, or you look at the set of all oncologists, right? If 13% of those groups are not African American, the only explanation for that departure from the norm is racism, right? If half of each of those groups isn't female, the only explanation is sexism or misogyny.
So the problem becomes then when it actually is true, it's
no
we're
doubt
not able to devote resources accordingly to the actual problem situations, and I think that happens in general in victim culture. Like, if everyone says they're a victim, then no one's a victim. You can't really devote resources to help the actual victims.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just it's grievance inflation, right? Which harms people, which is guaranteed to harm people. So take the Me Too movement, right? Completely valid, necessary. Of course, some version of this is exactly what we want to have happening, but if you're not going to distinguish a bad joke from groping, and you're not going to distinguish groping from date rape, and you're not going to distinguish date rape from the guy who climbs through your window in the night with a knife and rapes you, right? I mean, these are all these bear almost no relationship to each other, right? And yet we have one rubric of just kind of male on female sexual indiscretion that is just casting its shadow over all of this. And there are people who are acting like they are equally worried and triggered by each of these. And that's just it's so unhelpful because you can't talk about. I mean, if you're over here saying that, well, Al Franken is no different from, Harvey Weinstein, right? You make it impossible to actually put enough. Basically, you've got like $10 worth of concern, and if you spend $5 over here, you've only got $5 to spend over here. You're devaluing real victims if you're equating all of these things.
Right. So what do you think? What do you think will happen? It doesn't. It seems like trends like this only get worse. It doesn't really seem like historically people get angry and angrier and angrier and angrier. Like this is a continuation of Occupy Wall Street and trends even going back further. What is there any solution or hope in your view?
Well, I think that it can get worse and worse and worse up to a point where then it just becomes a reductio ad absurdum of itself. It becomes unsustainable.
That almost seems like it's already happened 2 years ago.
One would hope it would feel that way to more people, because it's been feeling that way for me for quite some time. But I think we will reach some kind of tipping point where it becomes unsustainable because it's just a circular firing squad. I mean, it will begin to feel that way and look that way to everyone. I mean, it's impossible to be so woke that there won't be somebody coming up to the left of you ready to destroy you for your not having, said exactly the perfect thing, because the taboos are closing in on all sides, right? I mean, there's just no space left to occupy. There are people who are getting destroyed for just pausing before they endorse a transgender, combat athlete, a biological man who's transitioned to a woman who's competing as a female MMA fighter and just, bloodying and battering biological women with all of the advantages of having grown up a man, a male skeleton, male muscle mass, testosterone for the first 20 years of life, and you get a haircut and change a few things, and all of a sudden you're a woman who's just wrecking every woman who steps into the cage with him. At a certain point, this begins to look a little strange, right? And how many women have to get knocked out before women begin to feel like, wait a minute, this has gone a little too far. There will be 1,000 examples of this kind of thing, right? And ones we can't even anticipate. Where things we will stumble upon data which will make these cherished, purely political notions unsustainable, right? And so, and we just decent, honest people are the only people who will be able to course correct for these things.
Although everyone thinks that kind of belonging to one of these groups, it's this massive groupthink, makes them decent, honorable people. They've passed the test. They're in the group. They found their intersection.
Well, the honesty is the crucial variable. So I got into this with Ezra Klein of Vox, where I had Charles Murray on my podcast, and I had a conversation with him. Charles Murray of Bell Curve, the Bell Curve fame. He wrote a book which got him defenestrated. 25 years ago.
IQs of what the claim is, the accusation against the book is that he says that the IQs of white people are higher than IQs of other races.
Right. Yes. Well, the book is the most controversial passages in the book are amazingly uncontroversial, given the reputation that this book has acquired. But the book has been enshrined as a toxic, racist manifesto of some kind, which it isn't. But there's a fact that we have IQ data that from various populations comes out that the mean level of IQ in various populations is different, right? And let's just step back for a second and ask yourself, what's the prospect of, well, let's take it off IQ for a second. Anything you can name about a human being that you could care about. Intelligence is just one thing, sense of humor. Anything that we could imagine that we can quantify, athletic ability, longevity, resistance to various diseases, the strength of your immune system. Just make a list of 100 things about a person that you could conceivably care about. Conscientiousness, right? All of these things will have some genetic underpinning and some cultural or environmental underpinning, right? There's nothing left, right? There's your genes and the influences upon the organism, and some combination of those two things is tuning all of these variables, right? And then you select identifiable groups that differ with respect to their genetics to some degree, because their ancestors were geographically isolated for a long enough time so that there is genetic variation, and they differ with respect to their culture to some degree, right? So you can select Black African Americans, blacks and whites in an American context. You can select different groups of Black people in Africa. Africa is, in fact, the most genetically diverse continent at the moment. So, West Africans versus East Africans, and even, tribal subsets within those populations. You get very different phenotypes. I mean, you get. It's just not an accident that the best sprinters in the world. If you look at the finals of the 100-meter dash in any Olympics for the last 40 years, you see West Africans, no matter where they came from. It's like the guy who's winning from France is going to be West African because there's some incredible genetic advantage. Clearly, this one can't be cultural. For sprinting, and fast twitch muscle fiber, in East Africans, in a subset of Kenyans, right, and Ethiopians, you get the top 10 marathoners in any marathon for the last several decades, right? These are not accidents, right? This is not. And there's nothing politically invidious about this either. This is fine. We can deal with this, right? But it is simply a fact that any group of people, any groups you identify, if you are going to test the mean values of any of these 100 things you care about, intelligence, conscientiousness, anything else on the list, it would be an absolute miracle if those mean values were the same, right? If you test Norwegians against Italians, if you test firstborn children of any race or any nationality against fourth-born children, you're not going to get the same values. It would be absolutely impossible.
Or interestingly, as has been pointed out in a lot of research, if you compare people born in January to people born in December, for various reasons,
right,
lots of results like athletic ability come out different.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, and that could be just noise. I mean, that could just be ultimately a sampling error, but there could be a reason for that, right? There could be an immunological reason for that. It's
well, the theory is that when they're young, a 10-month difference in age is a high percentage difference in their lifespans. So they are probably athletically better at a young age, so they get more coaching and tutoring and so on. So that propels them into adulthood.
Yeah, or I mean, again, I'm just guessing here, but you could also, you're talking about the time, that the months during which a woman was pregnant. So you imagine just what's the susceptibility to illness during various periods of the year, and how does that affect a baby in utero? All of this stuff is possible. I mean, the firstborn and fourthborn data, I believe, are fairly alarming, which is the economic and educational prospects of a fourthborn child compared to a firstborn child or an only child are massively diminished, right? We could have a whole victim group start up around fourthborn children, right? Where are they complaining, right? I mean, they have a legitimate complaint.
You just started it right now.
Yeah. Get out there, boys and girls. I mean, you have something to complain about, because the prospect that you're going to finish college is reduced by a third or something. I mean, it's significant. And yet we're not burning a lot of fuel over this. I'm not as should be obvious, and it's just nauseating to even feel that I have to say this. I'm obviously not denying that we have problems with racism and sexism and other forms of bigotry, but we have to grow up. We have to be able to talk about facts, and and an ability to do that, an ability to absorb whatever facts are coming our way, whether we're looking for them or not, could be easily safeguarded by just a clear commitment to some basic ethical goals. I mean, if we know that we want to live in a society that is ultimately colorblind, right? If we know we want to get more and more bored every time someone says, well, as a black man or as a Jew or as a lesbian, if we want that, we want to diminish the significance of all of that, right? We just want people to be people living as creative and as beautiful lives as they can possibly find for themselves. We know what the end goal is, right? I mean, it's Martin Luther King. The content of your character is what should concern me, right? So,
but people don't think that way. Like, and again, this seems a lot related to your conversation about cognitive biases. We want to be liked. We join the group where there's authority that we respect and has credibility in some way, some kind of social proof. And once we're in that group, it's like we sign up for all the other beliefs of that group in the most extreme way. So, for instance, let's just hypothetically say there's the gun lobby. So you're either pro people having guns or against people having guns. There's no middle ground. You have to be an extreme. Like either you want to sell little kids machine guns or you can't even sell water guns to people. Like people now take more and more extremes. But then there's the other factor, which is that, okay, since I'm anti-guns, it must mean I'm also anti or pro this, and this. All the other, I got to check down the menu of everything this group believes. It might mean pro-Palestine or feel this way about Me Too or pro-choice or whatever. They're all, it's kind of all these different issues are lumped together into one group.
Yeah. Well, so that's clearly pathological because there's no logical relationship.
Right. And yet that's where everyone's
anything.
going. That's the direction. If you look on your Facebook feed, maybe not you, but for most people, they're going to see just those opinions.
Yeah.
And it seems, whether it's algorithmic or societal, I don't know what the causes are, and it seems like difficult to find solutions because you're rewarded. You get that dopamine hit if you join the group in the right way.
Well, what you're describing is the behavior of a cult. People are finding themselves inducted into various cults and
used to be the behavior of a cult. Cult is small.
Yeah.
Now it's half of society.
Yeah.
And the other half, it's both halves.
Yeah. I mean, and this is something I've pointed out before. It should be strange to everyone that given one data point, if I know your position on climate change, with a high order of confidence, I can predict your position on guns, right? I mean, that's crazy, right? Like,
right, they have nothing to do with each other.
These are complex issues that don't have many points of contact. I mean, I think you could probably find something, but there are many things like this. So, gay marriage. If I know you're against gay marriage, I'll enter this casino. I'll spend all day long in this casino being able to place bets on your position on half a dozen other things, and this is what happens when people don't actually care enough that their beliefs are true.
But they think they care. That's the thing is they think they get active actually because they care so much.
Yeah, but I mean, a real education is intrusive. Right, a real education is a pressure from without that intrudes into your patterns of thinking and shoves things around. I mean, you need to the process of getting educated, and this is something that we seem to be losing touch with even in our institutions of highest learning. I mean, when you have students at Yale shrieking about the significance of Halloween costumes and calling for their professors to be fired because they haven't been given a sufficiently safe space. You're seeing the most privileged young people on earth in a place that is the whole purpose of a place like Yale is to it is a machine into which you want to put bright young minds and tune them to be interested in finding out what's true, and you want to give them all the tools to do that. And what many of these people are telling us they want out of this opportunity is the safest and least offensive kind of coddling. Right? I mean, there's a mismatch.
Maybe the higher institutions though aren't the place for education anymore because. What are we graduating? The students are now firing their professors.
Yeah.
What are they actually learning?
No. Well, I mean, the onus,
tuition's going up faster than inflation for 30 straight years in a row.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, I think it's very easy to put the onus on the students, but the onus is really on the administrators in most of these schools because what's happening is that the administrators are caving in. And they're not actually defending the intellectual freedom of professors. And it is a kind of, Maoist mob dynamic there, where like once you get a sufficient number of people complaining, it's just. The experience of anyone who's been in this situation, where. And this is especially true among academics, but I think this is I've been in this situation and I'm not an academic. When you put yourself out there in a way that draws the ire of the internet outrage culture, what you experience to a disconcerting degree are the private communications of people who agree with you and support you privately, but who don't have the courage to do that publicly.
Right, because it seems like the outrage, for all we know, is still a small minority of the people who are paying attention to your content. That's why you have a popular podcast, your books do well, people are responding to you. But what you're seeing personally, what people are arguing over are just the psychos on some social media platform that don't like something you said. And that might be a minority. We don't know. They're the loudest voices. It's a vocal minority.
But they're so loud that they're effective on the majority. So I mean, for instance, like, I've said things in this podcast, I mean, as defensively as I've, caveated them. I've said these things in the last hour that most journalists, politicians, and academics would be terrified to say, and for good reason, right? Like, I've been, who knows where the line really is, but I know in various moments here I've been close to it, and I just have a weird job where it'd be very hard to fire me, right? So it's like I have, I can take risks that even very prominent people can't take. I mean, you take someone like, Megyn Kelly, who's a recent great example. Like, she's got a $20 million contract with NBC, and one wrong utterance, right, that she can't apparently sufficiently, apologize for or explain, and it's over, right?
Right, and you have to caveat it always, because you can't say, so she's made some comment about, well, what's wrong with... She raised the question, what's wrong with blackface? Now, we have to caveat, that's perhaps, given the context, an incredibly insensitive thing to say. Maybe many people were offended by it. But you also look back, and we're also seeing this kind of in Virginia politics. Every politician, it seems, has either worn blackface or handed out cotton at Halloween or whatever. But then you have Ted Danson,
right,
famously wore blackface, I don't know, to some...
With Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, with Whoopi Goldberg. And his career... I'm not saying one should wear blackface and one shouldn't. I'm just saying that, like you said earlier, there's unfair treatment across the line, depending on whose team you're on.
It's just that we have, if we're grown-ups, we need to be able to talk about these things, and we have to care about what is actually true. So, I mean, take the Megyn Kelly case. Megyn Kelly, and again, I have to caveat it. I don't know if there's a picture of her somewhere, riding on a Klan ride with a hood on her head, but if she is who I think she seems to be, to me, she's someone who is guilty of simply not knowing how charged this phrase blackface was, right? She doesn't know all the historical antecedents. She doesn't know about minstrel shows, or certainly wasn't thinking of them at the time. So what she was saying is, you know, why can't, if you're going to dress up like Mr. T or Diana Ross for Halloween, why can't you put the makeup on that's going to make you look like Mr. T or Diana Ross, right? Like what, like that, like when I was a kid, I thought we could do that, right? I don't know how far she wanted to go in that direction, but there's no evidence that I'm aware of that suggests that what's really true of her is that she's got this deep racial bias where she just doesn't care about black people, wants them to be unhappy, wants them to live in unfair, status in society, and has a special fondness for racist depictions of black people. None of that, right? It's like, wait a minute, let's just, I'm confused about this. Like if what's wrong with putting on an Afro wig, right? Grown-ups have to be able to ask questions like that, and far more provocative questions. I mean, the truth is, that's not even a provocative question. And in my world, that doesn't even raise an eyebrow, right? I mean, it's just like, you need to be able to, and this is the example I've given before, if you're in a philosophy seminar, you need to be able to say, listen, all right, we're trying to get down to moral bedrock here, so tell me, why can't we eat babies, right? There are unwanted babies in the world. They're full of protein. Why can't we eat them, right? Now, granted, in the wrong context, you sound like a psychopath. I mean, you're not going to say that on a political campaign. But given the right context, in this case, a philosophy seminar, that is a completely reasonable and amusing thing to say, right?
Or in a comedy club, that sounds like a beginning of a great bit,
right? But what matters is what's actually true. Is this somebody who really is an aspiring cannibal who just wants to get access to human babies? Or is this a thought experiment that has a deeper purpose? And in the present, the problem we're running into politically is that we have people, and they're disproportionately on the left, unfortunately. Unfortunately, because I think I want the liberals to win in some basic sense. I mean, I consider liberal values to be the most enlightened across the board. But on the left, we have people who do not care what's true, right? Like if they could do a full moral inventory of Megyn Kelly, right, and you see into her soul, and they would discover there that she does not have a racist bone in her body, right? She just simply said the wrong words, right? She didn't know what the phrase blackface really meant, right? They don't care. Let's break that egg to make this omelet. Right. That's who we're dealing with on the left.
Right. So I agree, and maybe where we might disagree is I'm pessimistic that it's going to get better. Now, I don't know if it was worse in 1968 or there was students rioting. You don't really see the exact same thing happening now. I don't know if it was worse in the past, but it definitely seems like extreme all across every level of society and accentuated by maybe the social media algorithms, maybe not, I don't know. But so does it get, in your view, does it get better, or can we individually just focus on ourselves and kind of pull out from the groupthink arguments?
Well, I think it can get better. I mean, I'm having conversations like this and the kinds of conversations I have on my podcast under the assumption that they matter, right? Like if I thought nothing could change, I would be far less motivated to do this. And if I thought this was going to make things worse, well, then I wouldn't do this, right? I mean, so there is an assumption built in that making sense on these issues and trying to push both myself and others through argument toward more consistency in how we think about just the nature of reality. I think it has to lead to a good place. And now I pause because I remembered when I mentioned Ezra Klein, I remember the example that I was wanted to drive to, and I forgot to get to it. But this is the kind of thing that worries me, right? So, and this is something that I brought up to Ezra in our podcast together, and for which he had no response because He is in fact part of this cult that actually can't process these data in this form. Here, a few years ago, it was found that Homo sapien DNA and Neanderthal DNA are mingled in every human population, I think, that we are aware of now, except for those whose ancestors never left Africa, right? So Africans are 100% Homo sapiens. You and I and Asians and literally everyone else, there's something around 2.7% Neanderthal, right? So at the time, this was I thought this was hilarious, as did many people. And at the time, I think it was 2014, I tweeted, "Attention all racists, you were right. Whites are special. We're part Neanderthal. Blacks are just human," right? Something like that, right? So it was just me trolling the world's racists, right? And so and also just kind of virtue signaling, I guess, or revealing my bias, which I think is totally justifiable. That it's good that there's something that makes racism look even more ridiculous than it in fact is. But what if the data had come back the other way, right? What if just by dint of bad luck, the guy in the lab who found these data found that the only people who are part Neanderthal are black, right? This would have been a career-ending discovery for this person, right? The scientist who spoke about this honestly, the journalists who reported on it honestly, would have been destroyed, right? That's coming, right? The data of that kind, that whether we're looking for it or not, are going to just land in our microscopes and in our labs, and we are advertising to ourselves now that we are totally incapable of talking about this like grown-ups, right? That we're so worried that our politics can't survive facts that we're willing to ruin anyone who by even by accident is caught standing on the wrong set of facts, right? And so there are people who are
and it's even more because their careers are rewarded for ruining
exactly
the others.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't think things get better before they get worse, because there's still those rewards.
The unsustainability of this has to become more salient, right? So and this is what I mean. So when you're talking to somebody like Ezra Klein, and he has no answer for this, that has to matter. Now the problem is, it matters to my audience. It doesn't matter to his, right? And because so that every audience has to become more and more sensitive to the ways in which they are becoming cult-like, right? And therefore unreasonable, and therefore vulnerable to internal contradictions that will show just their operating system to be unsustainable. And so, I mean, I think we owe it to ourselves to care about our own contradictions, and we owe it to others, those with whom we're arguing, to continue to point out their internal contradictions. I mean, this is actually the most compelling sort of criticism of another person's view. It's not. It's one thing to say, I mean, if we're arguing about religion or climate change or whatever it is, if I'm pointing to facts over there that you don't acknowledge, right? It's a very weak argument. I can't make a lot of headway with you. But if I can show you the way in which your own assumptions, your own axioms, are in conflict with themselves, right? That you actually can't functionally believe what you say you believe at everything at the same time, right? I mean, you could believe one thing on Monday and another thing on Tuesday, but if you try to get those two, the Monday truths and the Tuesday truths to cohere, you're actually in contradiction with yourself. That's a much more powerful rebuttal to you. And we have to...
But that's where people have the bias, though. They just won't admit it.
Yeah.
They won't see.
Well, yeah.
And so I'm just wondering
that's why this is a very frustrating job to argue about these.
And maybe the solution is look at your background. You've lived a very different sort of career path than most people. You left college for 10 years to visit India, explore meditation, explore all sorts of alternative ways of living. You kind of did everything out of order. You wrote seminal books before getting the PhD, where some parts of society would say you should have waited. You kind of, did your own path, and maybe just education from a beginning level has to change and encourage kids to take a look at alternative ways of living, and that's how you develop alternative viewpoints. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think what it means to be educated is continually shifting, because it's not. At one point, it meant memorizing a lot of facts, right? I mean, it's like if you just had a great memory, you could be very well educated. Well, on some level, technology is making that less and less relevant. I mean, the fact that you have the totality of human knowledge accessible to you, from this smartphone in your pocket, we have a different challenges, right? Then it's like how can you actually vet the information that's coming to you? Every time you turn on this fire hose of data, how intelligent can you be in just judging what you should pay attention to? I don't know. I think a lot will have to be rethought in terms of how we teach people to think clearly and deal with information, and just how we more and more we have to recognize that culture is a kind of operating system, and it's got lots of bugs, and it's got. I mean, we're inside this thing that is delivering our minds to us. I mean, like our minds are not just what our brains are doing in each moment. I mean, our minds are external. Like everything around us is an idea on some level. I mean, a water bottle is an idea made manifest, and we're not aware of how more and more of this is up for grabs. Right? We're not aware of how how memes are constraining how we think, making certain types of thoughts possible or impossible, and they're being, they're made physically manifest. I mean, the fact that we have this technology available to us, where it feels like you should be. I mean, it's just changed the sense of what it is to be a friend or a spouse, or it's like it changes the sense of what a human relationship is. I mean, I have friends who I have almost never met physically, right? Like I have friends who are real friends, but virtually the totality of our relationship is email, right? What is that, right? That's a new thing, right? And these friends may know more about things I really care about than my quote real friends who I hang out with a lot in physical space and who know me in a very different way. But I have some people who I would call even my best friends who know much less of what I think about these sorts of topics than you do right now, right? So it's like, and yet all of this is a weird landscape psychologically and socially that has only come into being based on changes in technology and very recent changes in technology.
And so taking that one step further, and this is a slightly different tangent, but some aspects of this growing technology is ultimately going to surpass our ability to control or predict it. You have a very negative outlook on that. From like your recent TED Talk from a couple of years ago, just the direction AI is going, you sort of see this generalized intelligence that could be 20, 50, 100,000 times more powerful than our own brains that could decide to just discard us. And that's kind of on your landscape of how the world could end.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I'm worried about, and I'm doubly worried about it because it's very hard to worry about it. I mean, it's the kind of thing where if you think about it, you talk about it, it's kind of fun to think about and talk about.
Because life gets better and better until, in your scenario, life is just going to get better and better and better until there's this utopian tipping point where it becomes infinitely bad. like Terminator bad.
Not necessarily, but it's just that the thing that I notice about these AI danger scenarios is that they feel different to worry about, and it's kind of fun to worry about them. So even the kind of the emotional valence of being worried feels different than worrying about something else that would also spell the ruination of everything we
let's say
care
if
about.
climate change theorists are
Right.
correct in that this generation, New York City is going to be underwater, the North Pole is going to melt. Let's just take the worst case scenario. That feels like dangerous physically right now, if in the worst case.
Well, the problem is it doesn't. So, I mean, each one of these things is different. I mean, climate change is another reference point that's interesting because we can't really get ourselves to care about climate change. It's like, I mean, honestly, I don't know how many minutes a week I spend thinking about climate change, but it's tiny. I mean, it's embarrassingly tiny, right? I'll acknowledge that it's a real problem and it may in fact be on the shortest of short lists of biggest problems we face. But it's almost impossible to really get motivated by. It's this slow moving emergency. I mean, first of all, I'm not close to the data, right? Like the fact that there's any that you can get fake PhDs or real PhDs or deranged PhDs to stand up and say, listen, all these models are wrong. This has been exaggerated for decades. That puts a seed of doubt into many people's minds. The fact that we know this thing is so politicized that it's very likely that there is some exaggeration. There is some model creep and gaming of the discourse because it is just based on the moral necessity of getting this across, trying to get some appropriate emotional reaction to what is in fact a very scary scenario. Even the most scrupulous scientists will be led to start talking like politicians, right? All of this is just so. I mean, the fact that I know that to be skeptical about climate change is to basically sign your death warrant, academically or intellectually. It's I understand that those incentives are not good for an honest conversation about the data, right? So the truth is, I believe the party line on climate change, but I find the topic so boring compared to other topics that I spend no time looking into it, right? So I just check, if you ask me for an inventory of my beliefs and, I check the climate change box, I'll check that all day long because it's easy to, but I spend much more time thinking about more vivid concerns.
Well,
right?
like, wouldn't AI, like death by AI fall into that category as well? Like, we don't really.
It's just a different one. It's like so.
Like AI, the way AI broken down into the actual software works is mostly statistics. Some advanced, different advanced statistics and the math basically improves over time and the hardware improves over time. But it's not like there's any sense that there's real intelligence happening. There's no consciousness happening, for instance.
Well, I think consciousness is separable. So let me just to put this into context. So climate change is one problem that, I think virtually anyone who's looked at the data, and you're kind of relying on the authority. If you're not the one who's become a climatologist and looked at the data, you're just relying on what is being advertised to you from the conversations among, those who have. The fact that climate change is human-induced and seriously problematic seems to have a level of credence among scientists that's analogous to smoking is bad for your health, right? So it's a real problem. So, and I don't doubt that, but again, it's a problem that is so amorphous and so caveated, and the time horizon is long enough that, and the description of it is misleadingly benign enough. It's like 2%, a 2-degree change in global average temperature. that doesn't sound bad, right? Now, people say, well, that correlates with this level sea level rise, and right, but it's impossible to make it vivid in the way that you could make, or it's apparently impossible to make it vivid enough to be able to compare it with an analogous disaster like, a pandemic flu, right, that kills some horrendous proportion of humanity, right? And yet it may be an equivalent problem. So we have problems it's just by the nature of the problem and the kind of the quickness of their onset, they should be seen as analogous, but we can't get them to look analogous. And we just know we have bugs in our system of moral appraisal. Where I talked about this with Danny Kahneman last night. We just know that if there's a narrative that can be personalized, if a problem can be crystallized around a person's story, right? One little girl falls down a well, and she's going to run out of oxygen. CNN will cover that, 24 hours a day until that girl is pulled out of that well, right? But if I tell you that there's 500,000 girls in Sudan who are, quickly starving to death, right? Or if there's a, cholera epidemic that's going to wipe them out over the course of the next month, people just, again, that's the sort of thing that's so boring that the news can't even afford to cover it because they're going to lose viewers, right? It's just, we know we have to correct for this, right? In any case, what's unique about the AI problem for me is that not only is it kind of hard to imagine, it's fun to imagine even the worst outcomes, right? You get this sort of, science fiction thrill from it, so that even while you're thinking through the potential downside of, suddenly finding yourself in relationship to super intelligent machines that have their own goals, say, and that can improve themselves, it's just kind of cool to talk about, right? You don't feel like you're talking about cholera, right? And that's just what I view as a kind of a unique liability there. That it's like you're sort of worrying doesn't feel like worrying, and yet worrying is something that it seems very important to do in that space, because you only need a couple of assumptions to get on this train, and then I can't see a way off. One assumption is that there's nothing magical about having a computer made of meat, right? Like if intelligence is just a matter of what information processings of a certain complexity do, and there's every reason to think that that's true, there's nothing magical about the material in our heads that's doing it. So you can build intelligence into machines in a way that's substrate independent. We already know this is true for narrow intelligence. We know our calculators really calculate. We know that you can process information in machines. And then the question is there something magical about general intelligence, so-called general intelligence, that cannot be arrived at by any process we can set working in machines? And there's just no reason to think that that's true. There's nothing. I mean, you'd have to imagine that in addition to the meat computer we have some spooky stuff that could never be in the machines, right? There's that intelligence isn't at bottom a matter of the hardware and software that is set running on these machines. And the moment you dispense with those assumptions and acknowledge that that intelligence is a matter of information processing, and that this can be done in any material that can process information, well, then you just have to acknowledge that any pace of progress, we don't need Moore's law to continue, we just need to keep making progress, will eventually deliver us a superhuman level of intelligence in our machines.
Right, but there's also no evidence. We don't know, like you say, our intelligence might be just the way our brain basically works like this advanced computer. We don't know where consciousness plays
But
a role in that,
consciousness is irrelevant because consciousness is just
unless that's what causes generalized intelligence.
yeah. But I don't think there's any reason to think that's true. I mean, and it wouldn't even. I mean, most of what our brains do is unconscious, right? And most competence, you can easily imagine increasing competence in any domain that's never associated with consciousness. There's never something that is like to be that system processing that information, and yet it's effective in the world. So, like to even just take chess as the simplest example. Chess was something that only humans did until we built machines that began to do it by very different principles computationally, no doubt, than human brains do it, but more and more and more effectively until you get to a certain point where the best chess player on earth is a machine, right? And it doesn't matter that it doesn't know it's playing chess. It doesn't matter that it has no consciousness. In that domain, it is more effective than a person, right? Now we're in this kind of this I would argue brief epoch where the combination of the best human chess player and the best computer is better than any computer.
Is that true?
Got Carrie in the room?
Is the combination
Okay.
it used to be, right? The combination of a human and a computer.
Is it still true? Because when you were on my podcast, you were quite sanguine about it being true for a very long time. Is it still true?
Yes, it is.
The combination
What
is.
you said 5 minutes ago was not.
What wasn't
About
true?
general intelligence. I disagree completely with what you said.
What part of it?
Yeah,
You-
with
you
general
think-
intelligence.
What about general intelligence?
It's not achievable for machine the way I
It's-
see it.
Okay.
Because
so-
like take Deep Blue for example,
Right.
that beat Gary. Sorry, Gary. Take Deep Blue as an example. The way it won was by stripping out the any notion of intelligence. It kind of reduced the AI and to speed up the hardware is how it kind of changed from 1997 to 1998. But to your point, that doesn't matter. However it does it was able to mimic human intelligence, and we'll be able to find that in more and more domains until it's enough domains that it almost seems human-like, that we have lots of. I think that's what Gary means by generalized intelligence.
Well, so no, there's two things we could mean, and I would grant you that they're different, and this difference may matter for some things, but it won't matter for everything. So there's the possibility of building an artificial mind that is very, very, very similar to a human mind in what we mean by a general capacity for intelligence. And then there's another version where we could, in a more piecemeal way, build, kind of knit together a lot of separate, narrow intelligences that don't totally cohere. They're not general in this first sense, but they're still massively effective in all of their domains, and they cover, the top 100 domains, say, that we care about, right? So you take the top 100 things that we care that humans are good at, and we manage to knit together all these specialized intelligences which are superhuman, and yet there's still some place to stand and say, well, that's not really general intelligence, but man, that thing is better at chess, and it's better at reading facial expression, and it's better at detecting emotion, and it's better at every. We just keep adding to the list of things it's better at, and now we're in relationship to that thing, but there's no reason to think it's conscious, and there's still something we haven't figured out about this other thing, which we're now calling general intelligence. Now, a couple things to say about that. One, the human brain is also sort of a little like this, just jerry-built thing, that I just referred to, in derogatory terms. But there's just no reason to think that whatever general intelligence is in our case, or could be ultimately, is substrate dependent, that it has to be made of meat. I mean, just think of it's an effective rhetorical device to keep saying the word meat, because meat is not a promising substrate here compared to all other it would be ridiculous if we lived in a universe where what we know to be information processing that the crucial part of information processing that led to general intelligence or even consciousness had to be biological. I mean, we know that there are arguments that can be made computationally. There are arguments that can be made logically that falsify this. I mean, as long as I give you if I give you an artificial neuron that has the same input and output characteristics of a biological neuron, and I swap it in, provided the input and output characteristics are the same, you should expect it to have the same functional consequences in your nervous system, right? Then just start adding neurons like that. Then all of a sudden you will have an artificial brain that is doing has the exact same computational property.
I guess we don't know how complex that really is. There's no science that could tell us how far we could be.
We may never get there.
Years
Yeah,
away.
Sure. That's
if it is even possible at all.
Yeah, no, I'm arguing. No, yeah. The doubt about its possibility, I would argue, is just obviously specious. Whether we're going to get there or not that's just that's just a question of what is achievable, and when it's achievable. But I would argue that there are a few kind of failure modes of our thinking about this that are consequential. One is that many people who are skeptical of the kinds of noises I'm making now, who think there's nothing to worry about. I mean, someone like a very famous statement in the AI community now is to worry about this is like worrying about overpopulation on Mars, right? I mean, like this is so far away that we've got so many other things to worry about. This is just it's synonymous with a waste of brain power. Well, this has a few built-in assumptions, right? So to say that this is so far away that we don't have to worry about it is to assume that the time we have between now and when it arrives is enough time to solve all the problems we need to solve to do this safely, right? So we don't know how much time that is. But if I say, most people would find it consoling if we said, if all AI scientists agreed, this is not going to happen for 75 years. Right? No way we get superhuman AI in the next 74 years. Probability 0. Okay, well that should only be consoling to people who care about the far future, provided we have some reason to believe that 75 years is enough time to get our house in order. I mean, to figure out how to build superhuman AI that is truly aligned with human well-being. Because, again, it seems fairly obvious that there are in the space of all possible superhuman minds, there are more ways to build. There are more of them that would not be perfectly aligned with our well-being than those that would be. Right? It's just like there's no. In the same way that we're not aligned with the lesser intelligences that we trample upon all the time. It's not that we hate them. It's not that it's like, there are birds out in the trees over there whose well-being we disregard all the time. It's not, we haven't declared war on the birds, but just when we decide to build a building like this or do whatever, pursue any ends we care about, we're not thinking about the birds. The birds are an afterthought, and if we wind up killing some birds or ruining their habitats, they're just not on our radar. And there are more superhuman intelligences like that than those that we could build that would constantly track our, what we want, what we wish they would do for us and with us, right? What we want to build is, because here's the primary failure of imagination I keep encountering with people. People imagine that we'll build machines that are smarter and more effective and more competent than we are across the board, right? So the best scientist will one day be a computer. The best psychologist will one day be a computer. It'll be just chess as far as the eye can see, right? What people are then failing to imagine is we will be in relationship to these minds, right? This is a relationship. This isn't just a tool anymore. I mean, you're not if you're imagining it as just a tool, right, or just a curiosity, you're not actually imagining that level of intelligence. It's like if someone walks into the room and sits down at this table, and we don't know them, right? But the fact that they walked in and sat down and introduced themselves, okay, we know we're in relationship, right? Like we don't know what this person wants really. We don't know, why they, but they're things we immediately understand as social primates. We know that the possibility of this person lying to us or manipulating us for his or her own ends, that's obviously on the menu, right? We know this is the kinds of things that minds do. But when you say to someone, when you express a concern about AI and you say, well, we're going to build artificial minds that may deceive us, right? That may manipulate us. That sounds absurd. Like, why would we ever build a computer that would manipulate us, right? Well, if you think we could never build a computer that would manipulate us, you're not actually imagining building a mind. You're not imagining what it will be like to be in relationship to an independent intelligence, right? And there's just no reason to think, again, on whatever time horizon of open-ended progress, we're not going to build such minds.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So as a thought experiment, whether it's real or not, you're basically arguing this is a scenario we have to play out, and it could happen, might not, might be so far away, or it might be that the time it takes to build such an intelligence is also the time required that we develop defenses against it. Much in the way, I mean, we could build a disease, we could genetically build a mutation of the flu that could be released and cause a pandemic. We can do that today. But for whatever reason, we don't do it. So there's some, it seems like there's some backstops.
Yeah, well, no, but the problem is that there aren't those backstops because how this is unlike synthetic biology or genetic engineering or anything else that is scary and powerful and seems to need regulation or at least need some consensus that we know there are breaks we want to be able to pull. The thing that is most dangerous about AI is the thing that is also most tempting, right? Whereas in the case of nuclear technology or genetic engineering, germline mutation, right? There's a consensus among molecular biologists and people who would be poised to meddle with the genome that there's a difference between making changes to the soma and making changes to the germline, right? Like anything that our descendants are going to inherit irrevocably, that requires more ethical thought. But imagine a world in which making changes to the germline was just massively incentivized, right? Where like this is the thing that is going to make you $1 trillion, right? Like the step to as long as you can change the sperm and the ovum, that's where the money is, right? That's more the situation we're in with AI, where we have a kind of arms race condition where we're just trying to get more of it because intelligence is the most valuable thing in the world, right? And this is why there is actually no real break to pull because intelligence is the most valuable thing in the world, right? Intelligence is the thing we need to get everything else we need, right? And to protect everything we have. It is the thing that will cure cancer. I mean, it's deference to Gary, but there are more important problems than chess, right? And every problem, if it has an answer, it has an answer based on the creative use of intelligence. And so it's like on some level, the only thing scarier than building superhuman intelligence that's not aligned with our interests is not building superhuman intelligence. We need it. That we have massive problems that we want to solve.
So you're basically just saying, I mean, not just, but you're saying basically this is something that's very positive to society. just have to keep an eye on it, or we have to kind of keep track of where the problems are?
Well, it's more than keeping an eye on it, because I've been talking about this a lot lately. I spoke about this last night with Danny Kahneman in the Q&A period, but the philosopher Nick Bostrom, who wrote the book Superintelligence, which actually has done probably more than anything else to make these AI concerns fairly vivid to many of us. I mean, granted, there's a spectrum of concern. There are people who just think this is, again, there's nothing to worry about here, and then the people who think we are more or less guaranteed to annihilate ourselves based on what we're building. And I put myself somewhere in the middle, but it's a clearly valid thing to worry about. And Nick Bostrom has made a very strong case for why it's valid to worry about. But he has a larger set of concerns, and he just wrote this essay titled "The Vulnerable World Hypothesis." And what he asks us to imagine is what he calls the urn of invention. And the urn contains balls of various colors, and we have throughout history, I mean, certainly for the last 2,000 years, we have been reaching into this urn and pulling out either white or gray balls. And we've been doing this as kind of rapidly as we can. And a white ball is a piece of technology or a meme or a social norm or an institution, an idea made manifest that has good consequences, right? A water bottle. I mean, this is a fairly white ball. This is a super convenient. It's, there's a downside with, plastic, pollution, but there's, so maybe it's a gray ball. So the other kind of ball we pulled out is a gray ball, which is, there are pros and cons to this technology. It gives us, there's a quintessential gray ball is, splitting the atom, right? I mean, we can release massive amounts of energy, but that comes with toxic waste, and it gives us a power to destroy ourselves. It's a fairly gray ball. The question is, are there any black balls in the urn? Right? We're reaching into this urn. I mean, our default setting is get your hands into this urn as fast as you can and pull something out. Right? That's what science is doing. Right? And what he's asking us to consider is there may be some black balls in the urn, which is a piece of technology or a idea that cannot be undiscovered, that is so destructive that it spells the end of civilization, right? That we actually can't live in proximity to this idea or insight for very long before we destroy ourselves. And examples of that would be, what if nuclear fission were just much easier than it turned out to be? What if there was no fuel cycle needed to enrich uranium or plutonium? What if you could create an atom bomb just by taking two pieces of glass and a magnet and sticking them together and just running some current through them, right? Then we'd be living in a world where, after in a few short years, cities everywhere would have gone up in radioactive ash, because we do live in a world where 1 in a million people is sufficiently suicidal, callous, nihilistic, that they're going to run that experiment. They're just going to blow everything up just because they feel like blowing everything up. I mean, 1 in a million airline pilots are going to commit suicide by just crashing their plane into the ground, right? And not caring that they're killing, they're actually the biggest mass murderers, nobody's ever heard of. We don't even know the names of these people, but we know this has happened, right? So if it were that easy for one person to destroy the lives of millions, we'd be dead already, right, in this way. So that would be a black ball. It seems fairly plausible that there are some black balls in the urn, and we're spending no time thinking about what they might be. Misaligned AI could be a black ball. There are other black balls he describes. I mean, there's sort of the kind of the easy nuke version, but there's also climate change by dint of bad luck could be a kind of black ball, in that, just imagine if climate change were much worse than it in fact seems likely to be, and we were talking about like a 20-degree rise in temperature over the course of 50 years. That would be, as far as I understand, synonymous with just the erasure of civilization. But we just may, in fact, be the sorts of primates that can't care about a 20-degree rise in temperature over the course of the next 50 years. We just can't. We can't get our act together politically and economically, and such that we can respond to this emergency that is in fact an emergency. So there are certain things that we, even knowing that they're, it's mission critical for us to respond, we can't respond in a timely way. Anyway, this is just to say that there are very few people. It's like Nick Bostrom and 15 other people giving thought to this sort of thing, right? And our default condition is, let's just do more experiments. Let's just get more knowledge. Let's just share more data. It all has to be transparent. Like the recipe for smallpox is let's put it on the internet, right?
So it's, I'm going to bring it actually full circle, because this is
that'll be quite an act of geometry because we're all over the place.
Well, and also just recency bias. We want to make sure we don't end this podcast with destroying the world.
Right.
But part of what's happening here with both the cognitive biases, the groupthink we talked about, whether it's hashtag Me Too or pro-guns, anti-guns, and all this, everything that's happening in this extreme way that's harmful to society, all the way to, are we not thinking cleverly enough about these black balls that seem inevitable if they're going to occur? It's all related to this idea that we have to guide our own thinking more than just relying on what's worked for the past 4,000 years. So for 4,000 years, just increasing technology has worked, or seems to have worked. For 4,000 years, these cognitive biases have obviously worked because that's how we built society. We evolved to have these biases because we've Darwinistically selected for them. And so now we have to kind of change the way we think a little bit, because the stakes are much higher and much more global in ways that we've never encountered as a species before. And so I'm going to bring it full circle to your meditation app.
Okay.
And I would argue that spending time reflecting on what's really happening inside your mind is important.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it lands squarely on my meditation app, but I mean, meditation is one tool in the toolkit. I think it's knowing what. I mean, what's unique about meditation is that it's the only act that can allow you to find some intrinsic properties of consciousness that you realize that you're seeking a state of being by gratifying desire and trying to become somebody in the world. I mean, trying to realize some plan for yourself, which seems to promise a justification for you to be satisfied with the present moment, right? Like if I only get my life together in these ways, if I could only find someone to marry me, if I could only make some more money, if I could only, if only my hair weren't falling out. I mean, there's all if only, then I'd be able to just relax and be happy, right? And we spend most of our lives, just an absolutely galling percentage of our lives, never settling down in the present moment because we have reasons why not. We have reasons why this present moment isn't good enough. Now, meditation is a direct response to that largely false problem. I'm not saying there aren't plans we should, obviously this conversation was just a litany of reasons why we should get various things done in the world. But the question is how much well-being can we feel every step along the way?
Is it that problem that's solving? Because what if you had anti-anxiety medication that had no side effects?
Right.
Would you need to meditate then, or can you just say, okay, I need another prescription?
Well, no, it's because it's more than just being free of anxiety. It's being, because anxiety isn't the only, source of mental anguish. And there's just more. It's just a fact that consciousness has an intrinsic property of equanimity and well-being that can be found fairly arbitrarily. I mean, like it actually does, like it just being concentrated is intrinsically pleasant, right? So you can concentrate on the breath, which is just an arbitrary object. You can concentrate on your work. You can be much of what we find satisfying in intellectual engagement or even athletic performances. I mean, when you're in a so-called flow state, right? It is the quality of attention, right? Because many of these things are when you think about it, they're arbitrary sense phenomenon. It's like what is it about bouncing a rubber ball on a floor and throwing it through a hoop? Why can that feel so good when done when there's no distance between you and the act? When you're not busy thinking, oh, I hope I make it. Did I make? Am I going to make the team? God, I did this better yesterday. When none of those thoughts are intruding and you're just completely in the flow of, in this case, playing basketball, right? Why would that be satisfying at all? Well, part of it is a generic feature of the mind, which is concentration is deeply rewarding, right? And meditation is a way of just simply using that knowledge directly and changing the way you feel based on just applying your attention. And again, it can be applied at random to anything. You could stare at a water bottle and feel better and better the more concentrated your mind gets. And then you can use that tool. The ultimate goal of meditation isn't merely to feel better in the moment like that. It's to actually use your powers of observation to discover certain things about the nature of your mind which are important to discover, which is, to take one, highly relevant piece, is that, negative emotion, which rules us most of the time, anger and fear and resentment and anxiety, these are emotions that dissipate almost immediately when you actually simply pay attention to them, right? When you become the word of art now that is ubiquitous is mindful. When you become mindful of an emotion like anger, it has a half-life of a few seconds, right? So if you think that, when you get angry and you stay angry for an hour, that is the actual half-life of anger, you're just mistaken about depending on what level you want to talk about it. You're mistaken about neurophysiology, you're mistaken about psychology, you're mistaken about what it's like to be you. What's actually happening is you're spending that hour lost in thought about all the reasons why you should be angry, right? You're talking to yourself and you're not aware of it. And the structure of our subjectivity is bizarre, and very few people know it. It's bizarre in a way that is engineering our unhappiness, so that we spend a lot of time being far less satisfied with our lives and our experience than we could be, because we're telling ourselves a story about what just happened and what's going to happen, and we're always just essentially looking over the shoulder of the present moment at what's coming. And it's it is the basis of so many of the problems we think we're going to solve by acting in the world. So meditation is, you can sort of solve many of your emotional problems before anything happens. And then you can decide what is worth doing from a far less, a far more dispassionate place, right? Like what is it like to be in a relationship when you're already happy, right? Like, you're not getting married in the hopes that it's going to make you happy. You're actually happy, and then you're deciding whether you want to spend the rest of your life with this person, right? That's a very different kind of relationship to have. You're not.
I wish I knew that 2 marriages ago.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But that can be true of anything. It's like you're moving into a new direction in your career based on. It can be far less. It can be a far more balanced exploration of the opportunity space if you understand that there's a default level of well-being that is accessible before anything happens, before anything changes.
And again, it seems like if you're not devoting that hour of mental resources being angry or anxious or having these negative thoughts, if you're able to kind of focus attention on it, so as you say, the half-life gets reduced to seconds, then you're able to develop these resources or to reuse these mental resources to either be happier or focus on solving some of these problems that we were talking about, or breaking away from the groupthink and other cognitive biases that are filling your mind with stories that are just stories. They're not real. And it seems there's like this practical use for it as well. Kind of like, I would argue you're a very authentic person, and you've written about authenticity. You have a book called Lying. I would argue that part of authenticity is kind of breaking free from these societal structures or biases, or things that aren't as authentic but have built up in society as things to worry about or think about or be angry about, and instead focus on what's really happening internally. That's how you become authentic. That's how you sort of find yourself or your not self as the whatever it is you believe in.
Yeah, I think there are just a few concepts here that can change people's thinking in a useful way. I mean, one is that well-being is a kind of skill, right? And it's in the absence of that skill that people tend to be as neurotic and unhappy as they are, right? So there are things you can learn about just the mechanics of your own suffering that will allow you to play the video game of your life very differently, and you arrive at a very different outcome, right? I mean, it's like we are playing. Everyone is playing the best game they've been introduced to on some level. We're playing the best and most interesting game we can find, but there are better games, and meditation is a way of playing several games very differently. But I mean, one analogy that might be helpful is mental versus physical training. Now we now in the last 100 years have a norm around physical training that is perfectly uncontroversial. Now 100 years ago, nobody was lifting weights. I mean, the strong man in the circus was lifting weights, but it would be a completely valid skeptical challenge 100 years ago to say, like, you mean to tell me you're going to just go and lift heavy objects repetitively for no? I mean, what? It's the most boring thing in the world. Are you going to get on a bicycle that goes nowhere and just pedal for a half hour? It's like it's just synonymous with stupidity. I mean, what a waste of time, right? But now you are missing a real opportunity. Virtually everyone would acknowledge, and certainly every doctor would acknowledge, not to be doing some deliberate physical training regularly, given all the possible benefits. Well, I think we will very soon cross over into a space where mental training, specifically of this sort, I mean, I think mindfulness is really the center of the bullseye here. It will be uncontroversial to say that mindfulness is a good skill to learn, and training in it repays the effort, and it generalizes to well-being in all these other spaces in the same way that physical training does, and that it's good to teach it to kids as early as possible, and that there's a continuum of expertise and attainment in this area where there are real Olympians of compassion and concentration, and they're different than you and me because they may have some inborn talents, but they've brought these skills to a kind of perfection, right? And that has great consequence for them, but it also it's a reference point for us. It's like when you go to the gym and try to get in shape, you're not trying to win a gold medal in the Olympics now, or you're not trying to become a professional bodybuilder, but you have a reference point. You know that this project that you are getting some benefit from could be taken in an extreme direction, and that organizes your expectations for your own life, and you can decide rationally or not how much energy you want to put in any one of those directions. So it is with something like going to take another form of meditation, something like compassion, right? Like when you think of compassion, most people are walking around with whatever level of compassion they have by accident, and they're giving no thought to whether or not they could become more compassionate than they're tending to be, or what the consequences of that might be. And they're certainly not thinking about compassion as a skill that's trainable, right? But there is an analogous conversation to have. Like if I say to you, well, if you can't bench press your own body weight, you're limited in certain ways that may not be relevant to you, but like if I put you in another situation, they're going to be hugely relevant, right? Like if you want to be a fireman, right, and you want to save people's lives, and you can't do a single pull-up, right, you're unqualified, right? So the first thing you got to do is get into the gym and be able to lift your body weight, 10 times in a row, right? Whatever it is, there's to be some conversation to have about your functioning in the real world in ways that are consequential. There's a similar conversation to have about compassion, right? And like what is your moment-to-moment response to the suffering of other people? We have a totally non-existent language around this. I mean, like we're not even at the point where we could aspire to have a sophisticated conversation, where there's just no conversation about what it means to view the prospects of mental health in this kind of open-ended way. I mean, we don't have what we consider sane, right? Like in common conversation and even in psychological science is the default state that most people live, which is they're woken up in the morning by some stimulus that they can't recognize, and there's a voice in their head chasing them out of bed and talking to them every second of the day until they struggle to fall asleep later that night, and there's no alternative, right? You're talking to yourself. I sit down here and I say, yeah, they left me some water. And as though there's a person in me who's not me who needs to be told about the water, right? I can see that the water's here, right? But there's a automaticity where we talk to ourselves as though there's another person in the head, and 99% of that conversation is completely unnecessary, and it's the substance of so much of our psychological suffering, right? And that's a spell that can be broken, and there's a lot of wisdom. I mean, unfortunately, this wisdom is embedded traditionally in religion, and in Eastern religion in particular. And so I think it needs to be lifted out into a modern, secular, scientific context. But it is just a fact that there is a lot of traditional wisdom around how non-normative that default state is. And yet in the West, we haven't really figured out that what we take to be normal human sanity is so far from optimal, and we haven't even begun to think about an alternative to it. And that's meditation is a very useful tool in navigating to an alternative.
And your app you just released in the store, in iTunes and Stitch.
Yeah, it's called Waking Up. Yeah,
Waking Up. Right. Well, Sam Harris, I wish the next 2 hours we could talk about the rise of extreme Islam and hallucinogenic drugs and all sorts of other.
There are many
stuff.
topics that we've covered and could cover.
Next time you're in town, there's so many topics to cover, and there's more I'd like to discuss on meditation even as well, because I think it's extremely useful to have an app like yours. But anyway, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We covered so many topics. Also, I encourage people to read your book, Waking Up, your podcast, Making Sense, read Lying, read Free Will, read The End of Faith, read your recent book on Islam. You've written about everything.
Yeah, I'm all over the place. But I mean,
watch your TED Talks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the unifying strand is that I am concerned about the power of ideas, and I mean the difference between good ideas and bad ideas is the most important difference I have found in our world. And so I'm
and I think kind of developing having your own vision, having your own ideas is also important,
sure,
as opposed to subscribing to some other strain of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, well, where they come from is less important than which survive the collision, right? And we want it. What we want, both within our own minds and in culture, is a system that is selecting for better and better, more powerful ideas, right? So that's the game we're all playing, whether we think about it that way or not.
Well, again, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Really a pleasure. Yeah.
Again, seriously, next time you're in the city, come on again, because there
more to
seriously
talk
are
about.
these other topics I
No
want to
doubt.
talk about. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank you.
Sam.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.